The Israeli Air Force just showed off something new, a fresh weapons setup for their F-16I fighter, and honestly, once you understand what they've done here, it tells you a lot about how this whole war with Iran is actually playing out. So here's what they've done. They've put 4 Rampage ballistic missiles on this jet. 4 of them. But to make that work, they had to take off the external fuel tanks. And if that sounds like a strange trade-off, let me put it in simple terms. Imagine you've got a small car and you need to drive a very long distance. Normally you'd strap extra fuel cans on the roof. But this time your cargo is so heavy that if you add the fuel cans too, the car just won't move. So you leave them behind and instead you arrange for a fuel truck to drive right next to you on the highway and top you up while you're still moving. That's literally what's happening here. These jets are now completely dependent on American aerial tankers just to reach Iran. And that one detail, that dependency on American tankers, is really the whole story. Israel and the US have been running a joint air campaign against Iran since February 28. The F-16 has been doing most of the strike work. And because the Americans are in this from the very start, Israel now has access to this huge fleet of KC-135 and KC-46 tankers. Think of them as flying petrol stations. Without them, this 4-missile setup simply doesn't work. With them, each jet can potentially hit 4 separate targets in a single trip. Multiply that across roughly 95 aircraft, and you're talking about a serious amount of firepower going out per mission. So why the Rampage missile specifically? This thing was developed back in the mid to late 2000s as a joint project between Israel Aerospace Industries and Israel Military Industries. And the reason it even exists goes back to Syria. Israeli jets were flying strike missions there, and Syrian air defenses were getting good enough to actually shoot them down. Israel needed a missile that could hit targets without the jet ever entering the kill zone. The Rampage was built to solve exactly that problem. Think of it like being able to throw a punch from so far away that the other person can't even reach you. The missile flies out between 150 and 220 kilometers, and by the time it hits, the jet that fired it is already gone. It also flies at twice the speed of sound and follows this arcing path. Goes up, then comes screaming down at high speed. That matters because Iranian air defenses have already shown they can knock out drones and slower aircraft pretty reliably. A fast missile coming down at an angle is a completely different problem for them to deal with. The guy who heads marketing for IAI's Malam division, Amit Haimovich, summed it up pretty well. He said the whole point of this missile is that it hits targets from standoff range, without the aircraft ever having to go anywhere near the threat. Now here's something I genuinely think gets underappreciated in most coverage of this conflict. Western jets are just not built for this part of the world the way Russian jets are. Even the F-15, which is the longest-ranging fighter Israel has, needs to be loaded up with multiple external tanks and conformal tanks just to fly over Iran from Israeli soil. The F-16 has an even shorter range than that. Without tanker support it simply can't do the job. Compare that to the Su-35 that Iran has been getting from Russia. That aircraft could lift off from inside Iran, fly across all of Israel, and fly back with a full weapons load and not a single external fuel tank. That's how different the design philosophy is. And honestly, it's one of the clearest illustrations of how Western and Russian aircraft were built with completely different assumptions about range and reach. The F-16I itself was never really a dogfighter. It was always built around hitting things on the ground. It has conformal fuel tanks. Those are tanks built directly into the body of the aircraft so they don't slow it down the way hanging tanks would. The avionics inside are almost entirely Israeli-made. Elbit handles the computers and processing. Rafael handles communications. And then there's the Elisra electronic warfare suite, which is basically the jet's self-defense brain. It tells the pilot if a radar has locked onto him, warns him if a missile is incoming, and can jam enemy targeting systems. That's what lets this aircraft go into defended airspace and have a realistic chance of coming back out. The cost of all that is weight. The F-16I is heavier and slower than most other F-16s flying in other air forces. Less agile too, but for the specific mission it was designed for, that's a trade Israel decided was worth making. These jets also don't go in alone. F-35I stealth fighters are flying with them. They're not dropping weapons on these missions, but what they're doing might actually matter more in some ways. Their sensors can passively pick up radar signals from Iranian air defense systems before those systems even get a lock on the strike package. That information gets fed straight to the F-16 crews. They know what's ahead of them before they get anywhere close to it. What I think this whole configuration is really telling us is that Israel is no longer treating the Iran situation as something to manage with occasional limited strikes. This is a sustained, coordinated military campaign, and the weapons load, the tanker dependency, the F-35 I support role, all of it was clearly designed around long-term American involvement from the very beginning. The real question going forward is how long both sides can keep this up at this intensity, and whether Iran finds a way to adapt its air defenses fast enough to start changing the outcome.